Hey there, everyone. This is Niv here. I haven't recorded or wrote anything for a while, but back here with, I would say, a little bit of a deck tech, sideboard guide, just a general idea of the Legacy format, in my opinion. Legacy is a format that I've been playing. Well, if you've been following me on Twitter for quite a while now, it's basically the main format I play. I'm gonna say what the decks I think you should be playing now. This is a personal opinion, but also what I think are the strong decks in the format. So this is obviously competitive and not just play the deck that you like or whatever. Obviously that matters as well. So yeah, the deck I like playing is this 4-color control deck. Just a general control deck with the 8 removal spells, 4 Source, 4 Prismatic Ending, and then you have your general Brainstorm, Ponder, Force, 6 Forces, Sylvan Library, Expressive Iterations, Endurance, and of course Uro. Maybe the difference between my list and other lists is, for example, in Treat, we have a little new card from the Kamigawa set, Besiju, which it works well with Life from the Loam. Also, one Wasteland that works well with Life from the Loam. So this is just a general idea about the there's one Teferi also which I like. I might want another one. I'll go over options for the deck afterwards. And then in the sideboard we have our Anti-Delver, which is not Static Caster. Basically, you want to side in the Blast. The Blast is pretty amazing because obviously, first of all, it kills Murktide or counters Murktide. So it gives you another 4 removal spell against Murktide, which is one of the main ways you can lose. But also it counters post-sideboard like Narset, Court of Cunnings, anything like that, which can be a real issue. A 4th Endurance is one of the better cards, I think, against Delver. Both because of 3/4 reach just blocks everything except Murktide. It cleans up their graveyard, so they have a bit of a harder time playing Murktide. But the main reason that this deck, I think, is a bit better, above average against Delver, which is the best deck in the format by far, is because of Carpet of Flowers. Carpet of Flowers is just by far the best thing you can be doing against Delver, Carpet plus Uro. You do want to time your Uros post-sideboard because of cards like Surgical Extraction. So you want to make sure that you can play it and escape it on the same turn. Make sure to stack it properly. So to escape, the sacrifice is first and draw. So you first draw, then it goes to a graveyard, then you can escape it straight away without giving them priority to Surgical you. And Carpet helps you do that much faster because you gain so much mana. And then other stuff in the sideboard. I also like Terminus against Delver because the Delver list now, they're basically an aggro deck, much more than the value deck like they used to be with Monkey. Because Monkey gave them some value, obviously, which is why it got banned. But now they're basically trying to beat you down and burn you out with like bolts and try to tempo you out with Wasteland Days, Force of Wills. So they usually now have to play 2 creatures at once, and Terminus getting you a 2-for-1 is great. Also another way to deal with Murktide, because sometimes they do Surgical, for example, your Swords of Plowshares. So there's that. So basically how I'll go over sideboard planning against Delver. Sideboard all of these, so that's 4, 8, 9, 10, 11 cards. You take out all the Forces. Forces are pretty terrible against Delver. I like taking out Sylvan Libraries because you're basically almost never going to pay mana. I'm not a fan. You could take out Wasteland. Like the dream of Wasteland in the mouth, I think it's not what you want to be doing. You want to hit your land drops. And Wasteland not casting any of your spells is really bad. Also, so this is 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. This is 11. You could, for example, take out a Jace. Jace is so and so against Delver. Obviously pretty bad because they have Blast, but you have so many targets for Blast that I think it's okay to leave it. Plus, I don't think. I think I don't mind leaving it in, but you can take it out. For example, on the play, you can leave one Sylvan Library. I don't mind that because post sideboard they do slow down on the burn plan because usually they sideboard out the lightning bolts, so you can Sylvan Library and draw like one card with it or something, but don't go overboard with it because you can die to it pretty easily. And then like you sideboard out the forces obviously because they bring in blast, so you don't want to 2-for-1 yourself, and you bring in a bunch of counters yourself, so it's not like your protection is down. So that's basically sideboard planning as Delver. Game 1 usually is, I think, fine. It's very play draw dependent, like a lot of games against Delver, but you do want to make sure you use your removal spells properly. So, for example, Prismatic Ending, obviously, on DRC or Delver, and Swords on Murktide. And like Endurance can also stop DRC, Delver, and so on. Another card that's really interesting in this list is Entreat Angels. So this is a card that like went in and out of the list through the years, but I think it's becoming really, really good now because against Delver, for example, sure, they can force it, and then like, okay, they force it, you 2-for-1 them, that's great, and you can get it back with Mystic Sanctuary, so it's another win con. But against like the Mirror or Jeskai, which is a deck that's been becoming pretty popular now, and another control deck, this can just win the game easily by itself. Like for example, I don't play any mass removal spells. So yeah, I think this card is great now. It pressures Planeswalkers. So for example, if the opponent has a Narset, you can just, for example, entreat and attack Narset. And yeah, sure, they drew a card or two, which is Narset is usually very, very good against you. It is obviously pretty bad against Teferi because you cannot miracle it. But you can set it up that you, for example, end up turn Brainstorm or Dress Down, and then you can miracle it. So I think this card is very, very good now, and I'm a huge fan of it. It's also really good against Death and Taxes, for example, that they can swarm the board, and you have a lot of time keeping up with all the small card advantage that they have, and this can just like win the game out of nowhere as well. Like put a bunch of angels, so yeah. So let's go over some other sideboard plans. For example, against Jeskai control. So we can, for example, bring up a normal list. Yeah, this is a list that got, I think, top 4 in the. I think this was a showcase. So this is pretty much stock list by now. There's different lists, for example, less Hull Breachers and more other cards that are going. I think, for example, this matchup is probably a bit bad. I would say, especially game 1. But I think post sideboard you get a lot of good tools, whereas they don't really get that many good tools. They did get Blood Moon, which can totally win the game by itself. So you got to be prepared for that. But now we have a little tool against Blood Moon. So if you draw Besieger, you can just wait, like, with Besieger in hand, leave 2 mana open, and they play Blood Moon, you float in response and blow up the Blood Moon, and yeah, we just continue playing like you don't care. So how I would sideboard against that deck, you want to bring in obviously Hull Breachers, Flusters, Blasts, and Carpets. You could bring in Surgical. I don't hate this plan because, for example, if you blast a Teferi and you just Surgical all of their Teferis, they're very, very threat-like deck. But if you look at this list, for example, they basically have 10 cards that you really care about. I mean, Teferi also won't win the game. So, for example, if you take out the Hull Breachers and Shark Typhoons, they don't really have a way to win the game. Like, their win cons is basically Shark Typhoons and beat down with these 5 creatures, which you can easily handle with Swords, Plowshares, or whatever. So I've been looking at surgical as a way to basically nullify their important cards. You can also, for example, you can surgical, for example, Force of Wills, which is just getting rid of them, but I think that's fine. So what I do usually is sideboard all of these in, um, take out some dress downs. I'm not a big, this card could be good, could be bad, I'm not a huge fan. Take out the Wasteland, because if we look at their mana base, they have like 6 basics. I mean, you have Besieger for Caracas, so there's an option to leave in Wasteland. I'm not against it. But you definitely want to take out a land, because against decks that don't Wasteland you and so on, you can flood out, especially when sideboarding in carpets. So what I like to do against this deck is take out, for example, 2 Endurances. I like leaving in 1 because, I mean, decking is a thing a bit, but also it just stops, for example, Snapcaster Mage. You can attack Narset, which is great. For example, if they go like Narset turn 3 or something, which is not going to happen post sideboard, but they could. So you can just flash an Endurance and attack, and then sure, you basically traded 1 for 1 a bit because they drew a card, but you have a 3/4 body on the board, so that's great. Take out 2 dress downs, 2 to 3 swords. I don't want to take out too many of these, but definitely take out some forces. I like leaving in Force of Negation because you can easily hardcast this. But Force of Will, because they bring in their own blast, you want to take those out. You want to take out like 2 prismatic endings. I want to leave in 2 endings as well, just because it can deal with Narset the Fairy. But because we're bringing in 4 blasts, I think it's fine to take out some. So some mixture of this and like a Flutterstrand. Your worst fetch land is probably Flutterstrand, by the way, because Scalding Tarn gets you Taiga, which is important, and Misty just gets everything, almost. Yeah, Misty basically gets you Taiga, gets you Savannah, and all your blue lands. But Scalding Tarn getting a red source, other than Volcanic, I think it's more important than Flutterstrand getting Savannah, especially in this matchup when you're bringing in the red cards. So usually I'll sideboard something like this. It's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. It's 4, 8, 10, yeah, something like this. Maybe bring in the surgical if there's specifically that deck list. Some deck lists change it up. They have like Monastery Mentor. So if you see a Mentor, for example, you might want to leave in 1 sword, take out, for example, another Force of Will, or even take out like Prismatic Ending. Or something like that. Could take out the Wasteland and leave in the Flutterstrand, but I think Wasteland is important just because of Caracas. So, for example, because the games go so long, Uro is a card they basically have to do something about. Sure, they have swords, but I mean, they're probably not going to leave in too many Swords of Plowshares, because if you look at their deck, what are they going to side out, right? They have to side out like swords or prismatic endings, because they're bringing in some blast. They're probably bringing the Flusterstorm, definitely bringing in the Blood Moon, maybe the Fawn. And then, like, are they bringing in Surgical, yes or no? If I was this player, I probably would not bring in Surgical just because of against Uro, because they're kind of okay against Uro if you look at it. So yeah, basically these 7 cards are the only card I feel like they can mess around with, and maybe like, yeah, the dress down as well can go. So they're probably going to take out a mixture of swords, prismatic ending, dress down. So yeah, I think post sideboard, I feel like this matchup is much, much better, because we upgrade our decks so much, where they just get like some random tools and Blood Moon, which is very good, but basically our deck is also cheaper because we have, for example, Civil Library, we have Carpet, which just accelerates to the good stuff, where their deck just continues their game plan of 3 mana, sorcery, speed spells, or like Hull Breacher, which is whatever. The main thing about this matchup again is how many swords you want, how many prismatic endings you want. There's an option taking out 1 ending, leaving another sword, especially if you see Monastery Mentor, so be aware of that. But this matchup is basically game 1 is try not to get comboed out. So leave your forces, especially for the important cards. And Narset, like if you have Prismatic Ending, just kill the Narset with Prismatic Ending. I would probably not always force it. And I mean, you have Endurances game 1 also to attack Narset. Teferi is the main issue though. Teferi is a really big one because it basically have to go Teferi and then have a counter spell for your Prismatic Ending. That's a big issue. So you want to fight over Teferi. And Hull Breach, I mean, you have 4 swords, 2 dress downs game 1, so you don't have to counter it if you have those in hand. But I mean, dress down also is not a real solution. But remember, you can dress down and cast your brainstorms and ponders through it because, well, dress down just makes the Hull Breacher not have any effect for that turn. So that was that matchup. I think, again, practice makes perfect in this matchup. Just hit your land draft. That's the most important, like any control mirror almost. Yeah, and then the other, let's go back to the format. Okay, let's talk about Reanimator. This is another deck that's pretty popular. No, this is not the typical list though. That's fine. Yeah, this is pretty typical. Okay, so in case you haven't seen or, I don't know, followed Legacy for a while, this deck became super popular, mainly because I think Archon is busted, but also they got Grief, which is another unmask effect, so that's pretty cool. In my general opinion, don't play this deck. I think it's really bad. It's super inconsistent, and it's being hated out quite a lot. So, I mean, you can spike a tournament, but its win percentages are really low, and I would probably not play this deck. But just for our sake of this time, basically you want to treat this matchup like any other combo matchups. You want to mulligan hard into your important cards, which are Forests and Endurances. Obviously, game 1 you cannot know that, but I mean, some people play the same deck in Legacy, so you can know that. And then post sideboard, I personally don't have too much hate against this matchup, but obviously Surgical, the 4th Endurance, Hull Breacher, Flusher are great. Hull Breacher is just, I mean, it's just great because if you look at their list, I mean, other than Archon, it nullifies Gristlebrand, obviously, makes Faithless Looting terrible. I mean, they just discard the creature, but sure. And yeah, so that's a really good card to have. And Flusher is great. I mean, it counters basically everything other than Animate Dead. So it counters Entomb, it counters obviously Reanimate, Exhume, and so on, and Looting. The way you want to approach this matchup is you want to counter the Entomb and Looting and not fight over, and not worry about like, okay, they'll do Entomb and then I'll counter the Reanimate spell. Because if you look at it, they have way more Exhume and Reanimate and Animate Dead than the actual discard effects. They only have eight cards that actually make them put the card in the graveyard. So you really want to fight over these 8 cards, and the rest are just whatever. I mean, if you get to fight over them, you fight, but like counter them. So the way I sideboard is basically sideboard these in. You take out 4 Prismatic Endings, pretty straightforward. These are terrible. You take out the Entreat. And you can like take out, for example, Life Renewal or Wasteland. You have so many cards to take out. I don't like taking out Life Renewal just because it's a green card. So you want to make sure you have a high count for Endurance. But I mean, you can obviously Wasteland goes. Entreat is also a card that can easily go. So for example, these are the 6 cards I would take out. Prismatic Ending is just awful. Doesn't take anything. You could, if you think they're going to bring in Defense Grid, for example, leave in, but no list that I've seen plays Defense Grid. So, yeah. Another neat interaction, for example, like if they animate that, you can besiege it on the stack. Just another new interaction that you can do, and then they don't get the creature. Yeah, so that's pretty much Reanimator, I think. Like post sideboard, just mulligan aggressively. Make sure you have more interaction. Like don't keep a random hand with like lands, brainstorms, and I think whatever. Make sure you have one of these cards and like post sideboard. Not even Hull Breacher, but one of these 4, because this slows them down. Surgical is basically a win the game card also. and fetch islands so you can sanctuary back like forces or surgical. And I mean, this is basically a like kind of a Russian roulette matchup that you want to make sure that. I mean, it depends how they draw more than how you draw, because you can manipulate your draws. They cannot manipulate too much their draws. So if they draw the explosive hand, whatever, move on. But this matchup is fine. It's not great. But in general, I think this deck is really, really bad, so I probably would not play it, but just so you have a decent game plan against it. Let's check out Death and Taxes, which is a deck that I think is one of the better decks now in Legacy. But the issue with Death and Taxes is probably one of the harder decks to play. Like you have very small room for errors. So you want to make sure you play this deck really well. If you see like the players that do well are the players that have been playing this deck for forever. I don't know, like you have Yoshiwada is a player that I've known, SJ Cloud obviously, Louis Nil. These three players just total masters of this deck. I think this matchup is decent. It's not. It's like it really depends on both players. This is a matchup that practice makes perfect. So I think, I think this list specifically is a bit better just because of Entreat. Entreat is really, really good against them. But the card that you're worried about the most out of all is Cauldron Complete. This card is the card that will beat you. So you want to counter Stoneforge, Mystic, and almost Stoneforge Mystic alone. This card is just the only card almost that you care about. Sure, Spirit is good, but again, you have Sword, you have Prismatic Endings, so just make sure that if they have stuff like that. And yeah, like Aetherva is annoying, so if you have a Fawn, Force of Negation, you counter that with that. Because if you see they don't have too many spells you care about. This is a different list, Saga. Most lists don't play the Saga, so let's see Yoshiwada plays that. This guy is probably one of the players that I value the most playing this deck. So yeah, I think like the matchup is decent. Endurance is not great against them. It's pretty bad even, but it's just a body sometimes that gives you time, so that's fine. And then, for example, I don't have too much sideboard against them, mainly only Terminus and Staticaster, but these cards are very, very good against them. Just amazingly good. And I'll probably just side out, for example, 2 Endurances. Maybe like Endurance and a Fawn, for example. Endurance is bad, but it's not terrible. I don't think it's really that. I mean, it can surprise them, it can kill a creature. Especially if they, for example, play Timeless Dragon, you can put that back in their deck, stuff like that. So it has its merits. It's not a good card for any, if that's what we're going for, but it's still decent. And I mean, I really don't have any other sideboard against them. You don't want to side another Endurance. Fluster is terrible. Hope Creature really bad. And obviously, Carpet and Blast are not playable. Also, Besiege will help this matchup quite a lot. Because I mean, it kills like Batterskull, Jit, Bile, and like can destroy Grisham Port and Karaka, so that's pretty nice to have. But your best cards are definitely Life and Loam, Prismatic Ending, and Entreat. I think just mainly you want to protect Uro. That's your game plan almost. So you want to make sure they can't sword this. You want to protect it with your own Caracas. You want to hit your land drops. So I mean, if you see, for example, Ponder with 2 or 3 lands and your land light, that's really good in this matchup because they're not that aggressive. If you look, like all their creatures are whatever. They did get some really nice tools. Land Sash is a very nice tool against us. So I think this matchup is back and forth. Jace is also a very good card against them. So, excuse me. So I think this matchup it's a really long, grindy matchup usually. So practice makes perfect. So just be sure to time your spells correctly, counter the proper spells. Like Stoneforge is the best card. So try not to let that resolve. And yeah, I think that's fine. Alright, let's move on. Another deck that's we have. I'll go over some other decks like Doomsday, Lands. 8-cast is something that's probably going to be better now. So this is your typical Doomsday list. I think the list changed a bit now. So I'm going to... oh. Alright, sorry about that. So I'm back. So I'm going to try and find two different Doomsday lists that I've been seeing popping up. I think maybe this is the one. No. Alright, so Doomsday, in case anybody doesn't know, this is a bit different with Cabal Ritual. I think it's a pretty old list, maybe. I don't know. So when is this from? No. It's actually 3 days ago. Okay. Yeah. Never mind. So Doomsday, I think this matchup is okay, like especially this kind of list, which is straight up combo. I'm sure they have like quite a lot of interaction with you with duress, thoughtseize, forces, and so on. But if we look at the list, for example, endurance is a card that's quite good against them, just because they have to play around in a weird way. Dress zone is obviously just like you win the game card. I mean, they can put a pile with 2 Thassa's Oracles, and that can be a bit tricky, but I think this card is just still great. But you definitely want to fight over Doomsday. You do not want to let Doomsday resolve. So I think game 1 can be a bit rough because you do have just a bunch of cards that are totally dead with the 8 white removals, Besiege you, and Treat. But like post sideboard, you have what I do is sideboard and surgical, just because once you force a will, for example, a Doomsday, you can just surgical it, and then I mean they basically cannot win. You do sideboard and blast just so we can have a counter war. You'll win it. Sideboard and Hull Breacher is Fluster, and I do sideboard in the Force Endurance just because it's another hate card. It's not great or anything, but it's fine. So and you can even sideboard in some carpets. Not because their mana did not plan, just because this ramps you, and that's great. For example, if you see they only play like one swamp, they'll usually get their underground seas. So, and I mean, you do side out like all the 9 white cards, and you can side out like an Uro, for example, or even like a Flooded Strand, if you want to side in some carpets. And post sideboard is basically the same idea, fight over Doomsday, but we have much more actual cards that are really good. Fluster obviously is amazing against them. The blasts are good against protecting your own counters against theirs. This list, for example, I mean this list is a straight up combo, but let's see, maybe Luis played. Yeah, okay. This list is a different list, which is much more aggressive. They play Murktides and Hermit. So against this list, for example, I would probably leave in more swords. Just because swordsing Hermit is great. I mean, sure, if they haven't blew up, yeah, okay. But if they go turn to Hermit and then you swords it, we continue playing. And basically means Murktide is not important. They do have less interaction, obviously, because they have less Thoughtseizes and stuff. But I think this, like, against this list, I feel a bit better even, just because Endurance is even better against them, because it basically nullifies Hermit, because, for example, if Hermit resolves, or even if it goes to a graveyard, we can just Endurance it. Murktide sure is an issue, but I don't think we're going to lose to them playing Murktide more than other stuff. And against that list, actually, Carpa is probably better just because they're trying to play a different game plan with Dazes and Murktides while doing the combo. So I'll probably side in some carpets. Probably leave in some source of plowshares just because of Murktide and Hermit. And then you can side out like even library if you want to, or a land, like a wasteland. I probably would side out wasteland. You're not gonna waste them out. Also, if you're worried about Liliana, we could maybe leave in prismatic endings. I'm not a big fan of that though, not at all. So yeah, I think this is basically the game plan against Doomsday. Both lists. Let's move on. Against lands, another tricky matchup. It really depends on their list. For example, this list plays Spear Resistant main. Usually they play it sideboard. Your counters are not great, so you want to, because obviously they play a bunch of lands, so you want to use them. What's important, like obviously force some negationing and life from the loam is the really good, really great thing to do. But I think your game plan overall is pretty good against lands. You have prismatic endings against their exploration and Valakut exploration. This list doesn't. I don't see a Valakut exploration, but usually they play it out as well. Or for example, cards like Diamond or even Needle or Spheres, you have 4 prismatic endings, which is great. Dressstone just kills Construct, which is nice. They're not going to go for the 2020 plan too fast against you, but you obviously have Sword. You can also, for example, Endurance block in and then like Teferi or Prismatic ending it. I mean, your best card obviously is Sylvan Library. I mean, both Sylvan Library and Life from the Loam, just because they both give you advantage. Usually, the way you will lose this match is basically they're going to wasteland you out or ghost quarter you. So you want to make sure just to not die to that. Post sideboard, there's not a lot you bring in. I mean, surgical is great, so definitely bring that in. You could bring in the 4th endurance. That's totally fine. The thing is, there's not many cards I want to cut. The only card I could see cutting are 2 swords plowshares. You don't want to cut prismatic endings because they're going to bring in chokes, for example. They're going to be probably more spears or whatever spears they have. So, so yeah, I mean, I feel like this matchup is generally okay. Intrigue also just really good against them because it just closes out the game and it lets you fight Field of the Dead, which sometimes they play. This list doesn't have it, but they could play it. Just make sure that you take care of Tabernacle, like Wasteland or whatever. So the only way you probably lose this matchup is getting Wastelanded out. Also, timing against Pajuka Bob is a thing. This matchup is tricky for sure. Also, like, be sure that that's if there's a basic land on the battlefield. If you wasteland a stage, it can copy the basic land and then it like counters your wasteland. So make sure you don't do that. Post sideboard, they do get chokes, which is an issue. So you want to be sure not to die to that. But again, you can just like get, for example, Savannah, Taiga, and then untap land and prismatic ending it, and so on. So basically, their game plan against you is to land destruction you, and you want to make sure that that doesn't happen with like forces. Draw your life from the or also ramps you. So if that helps, and prismatic ending kills their exploration. So I think that basically sums up this matchup. Just play it out. I think it's another matchup that practice makes perfect because it's a really long one. But I think your favorite, not insanely favorite, but I think it's a totally fine matchup to play. Now we're going to talk about 8 cast, or because they play 4 thought monitor, 4 thought cast. This matchup changed, this deck in general changed a bit just because of a new card printed from the commander set of Kamigawa, which is Kappa Cannoneer. Yeah, this card totally changed up the matchup just because it makes. I mean, they play it out super fast, and then it makes your Swords of Plowshares cost 5, which it's not impossible, but it's super expensive. I think this matchup in general is okay. The reason I think is because once you deal with the board with like you sword you counter Sai or sword the Emery, you have 4 prismatic endings that are just really good against them. For example, against Chalice of the Void or stuff like that. So unless they have a really explosive hand, I don't think. Also, Dress Down counters basically Thought Monitor, and it can basically almost count as Emery. I mean, they still get the other option, but it counts the mill effect, and it kills Saga tokens. So I feel like this matchup is fine. The couple of times I played against it felt pretty good. And also, like post sideboard, it becomes just amazing because you have 4 blasts, which basically counters all their spells. You have 2 Hull Breachers, which are just insane against them because it basically means all their bubbles are turned off. All their casts, like 8 casts, the deck itself is turned off. You bring in Terminus and Static Caster, I think. Maybe not Static Caster, just Terminus for sure, because especially against the new card, like the Kappa Cannoneer. So it just sweeps the board. So I feel like this matchup is pretty good, post-sideboard especially. I would probably take out a mixture of Force of Negation. I think Force of Negation is pretty bad. If you look at the deck, there's not much you want to Force of Negation. And then probably an Endurance. You don't want to take out Loam or Wasteland because, I mean, if you look at it, you can Loam Wasteland them pretty easily, and Wasteland is so important against Urza Saga, so you don't want to do that. You could easily take out another Endurance, I think. You probably don't want to take out. You could take out Entreat. Entreat is not a card I feel like is needed in this matchup. And then 3 more cards. Really not sure what I took out. Probably another Force. I feel like they're going to bring in cards like Flusterstorm or maybe not. I'm really not sure what they bring in. Probably Lantern for sure. Maybe Caracas just to deal with Uro. They could bring in Force of Negation, but I mean, Force of Negation isn't even that good against us. It also doesn't help protect their spell because they can't cast on their turn. So I think that something like this, we need 1 more card. So maybe just another Force. Force is actually pretty good against them. Maybe just cut the Jace. Jace isn't great against them just because they go wide. They can easily kill Jace. I mean, you can also maybe cut the Fairy, but I've been kind of liking the Fairy against them just because it bounces a token. That's fine. It protects your card from Force of Will, so it protects your Hull Breacher. But I think this matchup is very good. You can play some other cards against it, especially against the new card, Kappa. So if you want, you can play. I'll go over some options in general for the deck after we go another matchups. But this card just totally kills them. I think this card busted against them. So if you want a hate card, probably better than Meltdown just because of the new card. I mean, you cannot Meltdown for 6. I mean, you can, but you're not gonna get there. But I think this matchup is pretty good. I think it's actually very good. I would say even, I don't know percentage-wise, but I've been doing pretty well against him. Just make sure you know what to counter him, what you don't care about. You have more card advantage than they do, I think, and you can control the board. If you can control their board, they don't have too much of an explosive hand. That's good. Chalice of the Void it's fine against you. It's not great. Just make sure to if you prismatic ending Chalice, just make sure to use 2 mana, not 1, so it doesn't get countered. And yeah, I think this matchup is fine. If you want to improve it, like I said, play Seeds of Innocence. The last matchup I want to talk about is Elves. Now, Elves has been changing a lot lately, I would say. There's a couple of different lists running around. There's the more aggressive, fast Elves with 4 Nettle, 7 Nettle, 4 Heritager, like the usual Elf list that we've seen forever almost. And then there's like this list, which is a new list that's been popping up, which is a much slower list. If you see, they have no Nettle Sentinel, only 3 headers druid. So they're trying to more outvalue people. They still have obviously the combo with Zenith, Glimpse, and Natural Order for Behemoth, but they also play Archon. In general, I've been finding it also be a really, really good matchup. I think like you have 8 removal spell that just are really good against them. I know 1-for-1ing elves is a bit of a problem sometimes, but because it can be hard. But I mean, game 1 you have 8 removal spells. You have Uro. Against this list, for example, they do play Bazooka Bog, so you want to make sure you don't run into that. I mean, post sideboard, I don't know, elves. I don't know how much sideboard they bring in. Like, they can bring in so many cards here. Progenitus can come in, Leyline, Endurance, Trophy, and basically all of this except Run of Foul can come in. I doubt they bring in so much. Like, Leyline sounds pretty bad. I would probably not bring that in. Trophy is probably bad. So they probably bring in Thoughtseize and some other stuff. But, like, we have a lot of good sideboard cards. Hullbreaker is just amazing against elves. Basically nullify the whole Visionary Symbiote plan. Nullifies Glimpse of Nature. So, yeah, I think this matchup is fine. Shepherd is their best card against us, obviously, so you want to make sure to control that. But a nice way to control Shepherd is, for example, if they go for the combo and they have a Shepherd, you can dress down and then counter the Natural Order. Because dress down of it nullifies Shepherd, and basically, so you can counter cards. And obviously, Terminus and Staticaster come in because, I mean, Staticaster is probably the best card against elves, but Terminus is also great. Just mass removal that you can Sanctuary back. I would probably, Teferi is terrible, just cut that. You could cut some amount of Force of Negation and an Endurance, so something like this. I do like leaving in Sylvan Library, just because, I mean, you can draw 1 card or 2 cards of it. Elves is not a burn deck, so you can know how much cards you can draw. They're not going to kill you out of nowhere. Like, I mean, they could because of Kratos' Behemoth, but if you can control that, you can draw, for example, 2 cards off of Sylvan Library and then Uro and gain life and so on. I would probably leave in Fawn and just take out another Endurance. I think Endurance is really bad. Sure, I can surprise them and kill a creature, but that's not our game plan, basically. So, I mean, leaving 1 is fine, just because it also can like attack wrist, or if they randomly go for the combo for the ultimate, you can basically just endurance them, and that takes care of that. Yeah, I think that's generally how it goes. Elves again I think it's a totally fine matchup. I've been doing really well against them. Just leave your removal spells against the important card, which are basically you want to take care of Wildwood Symbiote and Shepherd. Those are the 2 important cards. And Reclaimer. Reclaimer is also an annoying card to play against. Okay, now some other cards I've been trying out. I would like, or one card I really like now in the format is Timeless Dragon. I think this card is really, really amazing. I think it's really good against Delver. I know it might be weird because it's a slow card in general, but the reason I really like this card against Delver is it's a 4/4 flying uncounterable creature for 4 mana, which basically blocks all of their creatures except Murktide. They're playing Cycle, so it gets you a land. So that's really good against Delver because you want to hit your land drops, you don't want to miss land drops, so all the Wasteland Days plan goes away. I've been really impressed with this card in other Jeskai lists that I've been playing. I would like to try it here. I'm not really sure. I mean, you could cut Endurance, for example. I think Endurance it's also really good against Delver. It's a hate card against Reanimator, which is nice to have main deck. But this is a card I would like to try out. Like I said, Seeds, Innocent. If you're expecting that, if you're expecting the 8 cast deck to go wild in your local area, or whatever the Mana Traders event that's coming up this weekend or challenges. This card just, you can play this and it's great against them. Especially with a new Kappa Cannoneer, which is an issue. This card is very, very good. So if you expect this deck to become popular, definitely play Seeds of Innocent. Other cards that are an option, for example, Fairy, Narset, it's just more anti-control, I would say, just because the Jeskai matchup can get a bit annoying. The core of the deck I would probably not touch. So the cards I could see cutting is like the Entreat, some amount of Endurances. Dress Downs are like cuttable, but I've been liking them. Just a nice tool to have in his deck, and like worst case, it's just a 2-mana cycle draw card. And you can go like turn 2 Dress Down, turn 3 Uro. So you just Uro obviously don't get the trigger that turn, but I mean you just have a huge body on the board. That's pretty good against, for example, even Delver in late game. That's another way against Doomsday even to pressure them. I know that sounds weird, but I don't know. That's just another line that you can play. You can do. But Dress Down is really good against Doomsday, so I'm not really sure I would do that. But yeah, just another line to have with Dress Down. I've been really liking Dress Down. Just a nice card to have overall. It's also really good against Elves, just because it stops Visionaries from drawing a card. It stops Shepherds, so you can counter. If they go for like a natural or green something, you can respond Dress Down, so the Greater Behemoth doesn't do anything. But also against Progenitus, for example, you can Swords or Caracas it, so it nullifies that game plan totally, which is obviously your only way almost. I mean, now that I'm playing Terminus, that's another way, but just another card to think about. Yeah, I think those. So the cards I would like are Timeless Dragon to try out. Maybe another Teferi Narset. A Fourth Rose is something that's been in and out of the deck as well. If you've been following me, you've been seeing lists with 4 Rose. Excuse me. Visagia is another card that could see another copy. I'm not really sure what you could cut. I would not like Wastelanding. Wasteland's just a nice tool to have. But getting Visagia is nice just because another green land, and it's a kind of a Wasteland kind of effect to have. So it's a green land that it's also like a Wasteland. I used to play 2 Wasteland this slot, but Wasteland and against Delver is really, really bad. But it's really good for example, in the Mirror and so on. Lands, obviously. And just, for example, against Wastelanding Gaia's Cradle is great, of course. So that's another thing to think about. But Visagia doing both, yeah, I think it's just great. Also, obviously, against Cloudpost that I've been playing lately, obviously your game plan basically life from one Wasteland, Besieging them, that's it. That's your only way to win, almost. And then, for example, you can Jace. And Tree is also pretty nice against them just because it can win out of nowhere. Put pressure on them, so that's nice. And then, for example, against that deck, your only sideboard card is basically Surgical. Because if you Wasteland a Cloudpost, you can Surgical them, and then they're basically playing a really fair game of like 6-mana Titan, like tapping. I mean, they do get carpets post sideboard, so that's why I leave in all prismatic endings. It's also good against Pissing Needles and stuff. But that deck is super rare. There are like 2 or 3 players playing it. Just another thing that this stage is nice against. Yeah, I think that's it. Now, in general, what I would probably recommend playing for the Mana Traders or Legacy Challenges or whatever coming up in your local area, SCGs, I don't know, in Legacy. Obviously, this deck, I think this deck is really good. I think, as a general rule for Legacy, is practice makes perfect. I think the decks are complicated now, punishing, but if we look at the top decks, I would obviously Delver. This is the best deck in the format. I don't think it's even close. There's so many different lists, but I would definitely play Chandler and Region and the Brainstorm Ponder, Special Iteration, Force of Will, kind of. I think that's the core you cannot count ever. I think obviously this deck is the best deck in the format. It's not like an unbeatable deck whatsoever. It's also a deck that rewards good players. So yeah, I think like that's definitely the deck I would recommend playing the most. But other than that, I think Death and Taxes is probably one of the better decks for sure in the format. And then Jeskai Control or Four Color Control depends on your preferred style. Each has its own plus and minuses. I think Four Color is better against Delver just because of endurance and Uro and mainly Carpet Flowers. I think this card is just insane against Delver. Where Jeskai might be better against, for example, it's better against Four Color Control probably. Like, I think they have a good matchup against this deck, whereas we have a more kind of rougher matchup. Just because of card like they play 4 Teferis and Blood Moon is great. So if you expect, for example, control decks, I think Jeskai is good. Also, Jeskai is probably better against lands. And yeah, I think that's it. So if you like this kind of video, make sure to comment. If you have any questions, reach out to me on Twitter or whatever. Yep. See ya.